Recording.
Hey, good morning. We are now starting the 8th class using Brother Keogh's notes. The last class, we went through the traditional ninefold organization of the Dhamma that is recorded in the suttas. The next thing that Brother Keogh talked about is the fivefold classification, which replaced the old ninefold classification. This fivefold classification actually is into the five nikāyas: Digha Nikāya, Majjhima Nikāya, Samyutta Nikāya, Abhidhamma Nikāya, and Buddha Nikāya. The Digha Nikāya, these are the long discourses. They're quite long, many pages long, mainly dealing with dialogues of the Buddha with non-Buddhists. The aim of the Digha Nikāya was to propagate Buddhism to non-Buddhists. So these are more like missionary type suttas. The Majjhima Nikāya, the middle length discourses, they dealt with topics for Buddhists who apply them into practice. The Majjhima Nikāya involved fundamental doctrines together with meditation aspects of Buddhist practices. Now, in my opinion, if you want to buy just one copy of Wisdom Publications suttas, because they have Wisdom Publications publish the Digha Nikāya, Majjhima Nikāya, Samyutta Nikāya. If you want to buy just one, because they are a little bit expensive, my advice is to buy the Majjhima Nikāya. The reason I'm promoting the suttas from Wisdom Publications is that they're translated according to the commentary. It's not just some monk's opinion as you find online in the online suttas, the online translations. So if you want to have just one hard copy, my advice is the Majjhima Nikāya. The Samyutta Nikāya, these are connected discourses. You have different chapters, each with a different theme. You have a theme on devas, a theme on dealing with Mara, themes on dependent origination, many different themes. The Samyutta Nikāya was governed by thematic principles and contained many short suttas disclosing the Buddha's deep-seated insights and structure of the Noble Path. The Anguttara Nikāya, numeric discourses, they're in different chapters, from the chapter of 1s up to the chapter of 2s, 3s, all the way up to the chapter of 11s. They all have lists. So the chapter of 3s, for example, will have lists of 3. Right? They cover a wide range of topics into numerical order for easy understanding and memorization, more than 3,000 suttas. The Anguttara Nikāya were short suttas whose primary concern is to group the similar factors of Dhamma together for easy recall. So it's a memory aid. Always remember easier when it's in a list. The Khuddaka Nikāya, these are minor length discourses on Buddhism. There's a whole long collection of them. Now, in today's class, I don't know whether we're going to get through all 5, but I'm going to highlight my 3 favorite suttas in each of these nikāyas. And so it will be a little bit of a sutta study, but not an in-depth sutta study, just a highlight. In the Digha Nikāya, this is the long one, right? The first group, the first sutta, the Rajat Sutta, the supreme net of what the teaching is not. This is the very, very first sutta that is recorded in the nikāyas. And it is a systematic, very structured categorization of 62 wrong views held by religious teachers and philosophers of the time regarding the self, the universe, and the afterlife. In other words, the Buddha started out by saying here is a list of all the wrong ideas that there are out there. The Buddha doesn't believe in any of these wrong ideas. The Buddha shows that all these views arise from attachment, craving, and ignorance, especially through distorted perception of past lives or speculative reasoning, and therefore bind beings to samsara. So, as we know, it's dependent origination that binds us to samsara. The wrong views come from clinging to views. That's what these are wrong views, or they come from clinging. Clinging comes from craving. Okay? Craving comes from contact, either with sense contact or mental contact. Okay? That comes from the sixth sense basis. So, that's right, come from feeling. Feeling comes from contact. Now, what is particularly interesting about this collection of views is the Buddha in this sutta talks about the origin, how these views came about. And there are two categories. The first category of why people have wrong views are speculative reasoning, using logic, just imagining and then using logic. Well, it must be like this. I talked about this in the last class when we talked about my own personal experience reading all these Western philosophers. Descartes, beautiful logic. And then Kant, even more elaborate logic. And then all the other Western philosophers, all using logic. And none of them can agree. Is it the fault of the logic? No. It's the fact that where they started, I think, therefore I am, the idea of a self that thinks, is why they all took a wrong step outside the door and got off in the field, wandering off in that field. So even at the time of the Buddha, there were a lot of these wrong ideas, people just purely imagining and using logic, speculative reasoning. But the other aspect that was interesting is, and you don't find this in the Western philosophy, it was meditative experience that drove these wrong views. Now, as we know, the Buddha, just at the time of his enlightenment, one of the things that happened at the moment of his enlightenment, before his enlightenment, is he reviewed all these past lives. In this life, I was this person, this life, I was that person. So imagine another ascetic, another meditator, who experiences all these past lives. Okay? You don't have to be a Buddha to experience past lives. A serious meditator can experience past lives. But without the right guidance, you're going to come up with all sorts of crazy ideas that, hey, from my own direct experience, there's all these past lives. Therefore, the self must be continuous. Right? You're going to come up with all sorts of ideas. And so these are the distorted perception of past lives as a source of wrong views. What the Buddha said is the way to escape from all these wrong views is by capturing experience at first feeling and then contact phase, and not letting feeling or contact, then feeling, not slipping into like and dislike, into craving and clinging and going down that slippery slope. This sutta shifts the focus away from speculative metaphysics. Speculative metaphysics is just these wrong views based on logic and meditation, to the path of ethical conduct, concentration, and wisdom, according toward the Dhamma as the true liberation beyond all views. It highlights the Buddha's penetrative knowledge of all possible wrong views, showing his unique ability to lead beings beyond conceptual entanglement. Now, why is it called a net? First of all, a net, if you think about it, it traps birds or it traps things. And so it traps you to samsara. Also, the Buddha's understanding is so comprehensive, it's like a complete net that can get all the wrong views in and captured them. He doesn't refute one by one all 62 in the suttas, but what he keeps coming back to, what it keeps coming back to is dependent origination, that you've got to not get caught up in the clinging and craving feelings and contact. Okay. This is and I'm not going to go through this in detail, but this is kind of like a map of those 62 wrong views. Things like the universe and soul are eternal, rebirth only changes form, not essence. So if I had been one of those meditators who had experienced past lives, right, I could very easily come up with the idea that and start preaching, hey, based on my personal experience, it's been eternal, right? This whole self is eternal. The universe is eternal. Yes, I'm a different person every time I'm reborn, but overall, it's eternal. So this eternalism was a very common belief at the time of the Buddha. Partial eternalism, supreme deity creates non-eternal beings, or the soul is eternal but the body perishes. You might say, okay, yeah, the body, don't worry about the body, it's just the mind that continues on. So it's not totally. The ideas of the world is finite or infinite. The cosmos is finite, the cosmos is infinite, neither finite nor infinite. It's vertically finite, but horizontally infinite. There is this story of the monk who attained jhanas, was able to visit the other worlds. And then when he passed away, he said, okay, I need to go try and extend and see where do these worlds end. The 31 planes of existence don't end, but they're not infinite at the same time. Eel wriggling, this is a kind of an idiom in Pali, which means you're avoiding the question. The truth is indescribable. I don't know. I won't speculate. All positions are flawed. Fortuitous origination. Creation occurs accidentally by divine will. All right, there was a God, and he made a mistake, and that's why we exist. Life emerges from random combination of elements. Okay, there was some carbon, and nitrogen that got together somehow. And if you look at you look at scientists, right? Now, you look at the origin of life, it's more like this. This is what they're saying, is that, yeah, the primordial soup, and then things came in. Yeah, lightning strike, and then it was just random. And this is what started life. Exactly. So 2,500 years ago, the Buddha had already identified this as a wrong view. And then what happens after death? There is either the consciousness exists or does not exist, or neither exists nor exists. Nibbana, jhana bliss, is final liberation. Nibbana is not sleep. All these are wrong based on people who have attained very high levels of jhana. The self is destroyed at death, either by physical disintegration or annihilation, penalty grounds and exhausting merits. So you keep going till your merits gone, and then you pass it on. So many wrong views that the Buddha identified, all stemming from clinging, with craving behind that, with feelings behind that, contact behind that. Okay. And the reason I like that sutta is it really shows how comprehensive the Buddha's view is, and it helps analyze all other views compared to the Buddha. That's why I particularly like that sutta. One of my favorites. The next one of my favorites is the Mahaparinibbana Sutta. It's the biggest, that's the longest sutta. The Great Passing, the Buddha's last days. Detailed account of the Buddha's last journey, where he went, teachings, and Parinibbana serving as the key source for understanding the closing chapter of his life. It talks about the fact that the Buddha is immortal. He passed away, Parinibbana. So death is inevitable for all of us. Death is inevitable for all of us. also in that sutta, the Buddha spent a lot of time focusing on the harmony of the Sangha. How important the harmony of the Sangha was moving forward. The Buddha also, in the last person to get instruction from the Buddha was Subhata. And Subhata came up to him and said, hey, there's all these different teachers around. How do I know who is correct? And the Buddha gave a very important answer. He said, any teachings that include the Noble Eightfold Path are correct. So, why that's important to me is I go and say, all right, Theravada includes the Noble Eightfold Path, but so does Mahayana, so does Vajrayana. Yes, they've got slightly different interpretations, but there's no reason to say that Theravada is inherently superior or that they're wrong. Vajrayana are wrong. For different people, equally valid paths. For me personally, I prefer the Theravada when we do comparing of the Theravada, Mahayana, Vajrayana, but they're all valid. The other thing that the Buddha talked about here are the places that we talked, the 4 places for pilgrimage. We talked about stupas and relics. Now, it's important that one shifts from purely reverence into action. Simply reciting many times or visiting these places isn't enough, or bowing many times, or rituals are not enough. Even to relics or the holy places, not enough. You've got to put it into action. Pariyati Patipati Pativeda. You can study all you want, learn. If it needs to be inspiring you to, all that studying and learning needs to inspire you into a practice. And then from Patipati comes Pativeda, which is the realization. So this sutta emphasizes core principles such as self-reliance. The Buddha said, be a refuge unto yourselves. Nobody can pull you out of the mud if they're stuck in the mud as well. Right? Don't look for somebody to pull you out of the mud if they're stuck in the mud as well. You need to go to the Buddhism and the Sangha. And I hear, and we'll talk later about the refuges, but the true safety is in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. Okay. The importance of the 4 foundations of mindfulness, the supremacy of the Dhamma as a teacher after the Buddha's passing. The Buddha refused to name a successor. He said, let the Dhamma and the Vinaya be your teacher. It outlines Vinaya-related guidance, including how to maintain discipline, unity, thus shaping the early organization and continuity of the Sangha. The Buddha also laid out here the 4 principles of how do you know if something is included in the Buddha's teaching, is included in the Dhamma. First of all, if there's any disagreement between your idea and what's in the suttas and Vinaya, then it's not Dhamma. Secondly, going to a very large group of monks, the opinion of a large group of monks that also agrees with the suttas and the Vinaya. That's the second mode. First is if you've heard it from the Buddha. Second is from a large group of monks. Next is from a small group of monks. And finally from a single elder monk who preaches a doctrine, as long as it is not against the Dhamma and the suttas and the Vinaya, it can be accepted. And I guess even below that would be the personal opinion of somebody like myself. So as long as it is aligned with the suttas and the Vinaya, right? In terms of establishes the importance of pilgrimage sites, describes the distribution of relics, reinforcing devotion and cultural aspects of Buddhism. Yes, there is that ritual aspect to it, but it needs, as I mentioned earlier, it needs to be put into practice. It exemplifies the Buddha's equanimity, wisdom, and compassion in the face of death, offering a powerful model of peaceful and mindful dying. Okay. So, before I move to the next, one more long sutta. The Sila Sutta, advice for lay people. Now, the story behind it, we're going to go into a lot of depth into the Sila Sutta, but what happened was there was a husband and wife who were Sotapanna. They had a son. They're trying to influence the son to follow the Buddha. And the son said, "No, I don't want to, any money I get, I don't want to give it to the Sangha. And I don't want to have to spend time going down my knees and dirtying my robe and so on, or dirtying the clothes. I'm not interested in that." So he was not keen to follow the Buddha. And the parents, being so upon this was quite upsetting for them. Mother passed away, and the father was about to pass away, called his son, and said, "Son, now, there's something I want you to do. Before every morning when you first wake up, when you wash your hair, I need you to go out and pay respect to the 6 directions. East, south, west, north, above and below. Just pay respect to those 6 directions." The son said, "Yeah, okay, I can do that. My father's final wish, I can do that. That's not a big deal." And the reason that Sila's father did that is he knew that the Buddha would be coming along at some point. And so Sila was out doing this morning ritual, paying respect to the 6 directions. The Buddha said, "Let me tell you how to better interpret those 6 directions, the right way to interpret them." So the Buddha redirects Sila's ritualistic worship of the 6 directions into ethical duties and social responsibilities, grounding spiritual practice in everyday life. In other words, this is not about becoming a monk or becoming a saint, but it's simply social responsibility. It's the layman's code of ethics. It outlines reciprocal duties of a layperson to parents, teachers, spouses, friends, employees, and religious leaders, providing a framework for harmonious social conduct. By emphasizing reciprocal duties, the Sutta focuses on mutual respect, trust, and social stability, which supports Dhamma practice. It includes advice on avoiding harmful behaviors, choosing good friends, practicing moderation and diligence, pointing to material and spiritual well-being. Now, we're going to go through this diagram a lot later, but the 6 direct, what the Buddha told Sila was, in ancient India, the direction, here we talk about north, south, east, west, right? We start with north because compasses face north. At the time of the Buddha, they didn't start with north, they started with east because that's where the sun rises. Okay, so east is where the parent is. So the Buddha applied the commitment to parents. You need to support them, fulfill their duties, honor their traditions, preserve their inheritance, and honor their passing. Those are the responsibilities of a layperson to their parents. And very importantly, reciprocal responsibilities from the parents to the kids. Refrain from evil, nurture good skills, read marriage, provide inheritance. So it shows the reciprocal responsibilities that keep society networked together. Okay, we're going to be going through all these in detail, but I just want to give you a sneak peek at this diagram of reciprocal responsibilities for parents, teachers, your spouse, friends, ascetics, and your employees. Okay. So I covered 3 suttas: the Brahmajala Sutta, the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, and Sikala Sutta. Any questions on the three nikāyas suttas? Okay. Just want to check online, you can hear me?
Yes, very loud.
Yes, Brother Rob, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks. Now, in the Majjhima Nikāya, the obvious sutta, especially for me as a meditator, is the Satipatthana Sutta. The Buddha declares it as the nikāyas Magga, the one direct path to the purification of beings and the realization of Nibbana. So he said, this is the most important way, this is how you attain Nibbana. It goes from the four foundations of mindfulness, giving you complete and structured method for cultivating sattva or mindfulness, which is understanding or wisdom. I want to mention here, when I talk about timing, this wisdom, this understanding, this insight, it is not thinking or analysis. It is understanding without thinking or analysis. Wisdom, insight, not through thinking or analysis, but through direct experience. Designed for all levels of yogis, from beginners to arahants, and its foundation to nearly all Theravada meditation traditions, including Mahasi style, Vipassana. Through systematic observation of phenomena such as anicca dukkha anatta, the sutta guides yogis toward the direct experiential insight leading to dispassion and liberation. Now, here is a kind of a simple diagram representing the flow of the Satipatthana Sutta. Starts out by saying this is the one path or one direction, nikāyas Magga. Then it gives a definition of Satipatthana, or the practice, definition of how the practice should be done. Ardent, strong, heroic energy, clearly known, with wisdom, with understanding. Mindfulness, free from desires and discontent regarding the world. This means with concentration, you're not with a fluttered, restless, distracted mind, but with a focused, concentrated mind. That's the definition of the practice. Then it rotates through a whole bunch of objects of mindfulness. So starting with the breath, being aware of the breath, then the elements and many different aspects of the body, feeling, consciousness, and dhammas. And for every object of mindfulness, it gives you what you're supposed to do. Contemplate internally, externally, and both internally and externally. What does that mean? It means experiencing within yourself, not thinking about it, but experiencing within yourself. Externally is extrapolating that internal experience through that experiential knowledge to inferential knowledge, saying it exists outside. It is a universal. Internally and externally means this is the universal aspect. So, watching the breath rising and falling, this is observing internally. Externally is, hey, other people also have rising and falling. This isn't just for me. And then rising and falling, that experience of that wind element, that little pushing is global. Next, contemplate the rising, passing away, and the rising and passing away. Earlier, I talked about how the suttas, the characteristic of every meditation object, there is a rising sub-moment, an existing sub-moment, a falling away sub-moment. In an instant, it arises, exists to perishing, and then it perishes. That's being aware of this, directly experiencing it. This becomes an awareness of anicca, impermanence, when things are instantly arising, existing, and falling away. Then the last thing for every object is continuous mindfulness established to the extent necessary for bare knowledge. In other words, you're only aware, you don't, just bare awareness. Nothing thinking, no elaboration, just bare awareness. And these three instructions in the refrain are repeated 13 times for every different object of mindfulness. So whether we add objects or delete objects, it doesn't really matter. The refrain is the same. And then finally, after doing all of that, there's a prediction. If you follow this for 7 years, 7 months, or even 7 days, one can attain either arhatship or at least anagami. That's according to the sutta. So this is the overall structure. And what's important here to me is the object. I don't get caught up, so personally, I don't get caught up in the specific object. I get caught up on the definition aspect and the refrain aspect. The object doesn't matter what the object is. Applying, ardent, clear, knowing, mindful, with good concentration, internally, externally, arise, passing away, arise, passing away. Bare awareness or bare knowledge, that is what I apply myself to. The next sutta in the Majjhima Nikāya, the second one, is the Manipindika Sutta, the Honeybow Sutta. This gives a psychological map showing how the mind constructs the illusion of self or word. I form, I consciousness, contact, feeling arising in one event that leads to perception, thinking, mental proliferation. This sutta, in this particular sutta, is in the context of explaining conflict. So it explains that conflict arises because of perception leading to non-conceptual proliferation of culture, which in turn fuels craving, views, and disputes. Again, the views that we talked about in the Brahmajala Sutta all came from craving and clinging. Identifies perceptions leading to proliferation as the key mechanism by which the mind gets entangled in suffering. It shows how we get caught up in samsara. It points towards the importance of stopping at bare awareness rather than following the proliferative thought, thereby supporting the vipassana practice and the path to liberation. Now, the section of the sutta that I focus on, represented by this diagram, it talks about dependent on I in visited forms, I consciousness arises. The meaning of the three is contact. With contact as a condition, there is feeling. Those are the words from the sutta. And you can see the diagram, how the diagram represents this. The I, which is the sense space, and visible form, which is the object. With those two as a condition, I consciousness arises. The meaning of the three is contact. That leads to contact, and contact leads to feeling. But it's not leads to. They all happen at the same time. It's a single event. It's a natural event that happens automatically. Okay, so whether it's in my mind or an arahat's mind, exactly the same things are going to happen. In my mind or an arahat's mind, there's going to be a working eye, visible object, eye consciousness is going to pop up. Within that same citta, using Abhidhamma terms, within that same eye consciousness citta, there is a contact and feeling naturally arising. It could be a pleasant feeling, it could be an unpleasant feeling, it could be a neutral feeling. Doesn't matter whether it's me or Buddha. Feeling is going to arise together with contact, together in that consciousness that arose because of thin space and the object colliding. natural event that happens automatically. The sutta then proceeds to say that what one feels, one perceives, this is labeling in the mind. What one perceives, one thinks about, what one thinks about, one proliferates. You'll notice the change in language. Now it's what one feels, what one perceives, what one thinks. It's now personalized. So this is where the flow of activity in my mind and the flow of activity in an arhat's mind are going to be different. Pleasant feeling in my mind will almost always lead to a pleasant, getting caught up in the pleasant feeling, perception, thinking, proliferation. In a arhat's mind, whether it's pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, it doesn't matter. The monk can be aware, the arhat can be aware of the pleasant feeling or aware of the unpleasant feeling. Oh, there's pain happening right now. Oh, there's pleasure happening right now. But it's like from an observer point of view. Whereas for me, oh, my pleasure, my pain, it becomes personalized. And this is subjective, not objective, but a subjective series of processes that depend on one's conditioning. The reason that my mind works the way it does and differently from the way the Buddha's mind works or an arhat's mind is that there's all this conditioning that is all these habits, all these latent defilements, which are pushing me to be attracted to pleasant and repelled from the unpleasant. My experience, for example, when watching pain while meditating. Yes, at the beginning, pain, there's a natural, oh, I don't like this pain. Pain in my knee, I want to move. But then, when the meditation develops, pain is a wonderful object because it grabs attention. It really grabs the mind's attention. And it's no longer something that makes me want to shift my posture. It's no longer something that I repel from. It's an interesting object that has got elements of twisting and pulling and heat. All of those are, and they're arising for a moment, and then they're dissolving and very interesting to watch and observe. It's a wonderful object. Pain is a wonderful object. This, it gives me just a brief, a brief glimpse at how an arahat experiences the world. Normally, just like you guys, pain in the knee, I shift. Shift my leg. But when the meditation becomes deep enough, I'm not claiming any form of enlightenment or anything like that. But it is just a glimpse of there is another way of looking at pain. It doesn't have to be something that repels you. It can be something that is something to be observed, something to be watched, something to be studied and examined and learned from. The nature of existence. Okay. The next sutta, my next favorite sutta in the nikāyas is the simile of the snake. It compares the Dhamma to a snake. If grasped long, it bites. If grasped correctly by the head, it is sacred and useful. So this underscores the need for wise and careful understanding of the teachings. This is why I am so concerned about the translations that are used. When I look at some of the translations by the translators, I am worried. Am I grabbing the snake by the tail? It's still the Dhamma, but is it going to come back and bite me because I'm not grabbing it properly? That's why I keep going back to Bhikkhu Bodhi and the wisdom publications. Why do I believe that they are more correct than the online versions? It's because Bhikkhu Bodhi and Maurice Walsh, in the case of the Nikāya, are deeply rooted in the commentaries, the traditional Theravada interpretation. May not be. So basically, it's been over hundreds, thousands of years. It's been developed as this is the right way to interpret this. Maybe the new guy, the online guy, is correct in his way of interpreting it. But I prefer to trust something for 1,000 years than this 1 month in personal interpretation. Okay? Because if I have any questions, I know where I can go back to. Okay? So grabbing very careful about grabbing by the head, not the tail. And this is why very often, even when I've got a little bit more question, I look at the Pali. Now, I'm not a Pali scholar, but I can recognize a few words, right? And I can get a dictionary and reference those words. So I learned enough words that I can help them, right? And so it warns against clinging even to the right teachers, showing that attachment to views, including those about the self, leads to suffering and obstructs liberation. I met this nun. For some reason, she was actually staying in my condo. I happened to meet up with her at Center. And so we spent a couple of hours chatting, and she said her teacher, she's American, teacher was American. She said her teacher only looks at the Majjhima Nikāya. That's the only suttas he looks at. And she had a very, very warm version of the Majjhima Nikāya. Every, in the notes, in the column, in the borders were filled with notes. That's the fault. She always carries it with her. It's the only set of suttas that she looks at. To me, I mean, okay, yeah, the Majjhima Nikāya. Yes, great place, but that's not the complete list of the Buddhist teachings, right? There's more than just the Majjhima Nikāya. So I was a little bit, and so when I started listening to her, I could start to see many of her views did not align with the rest of the Buddhist teachings. They also have this in the same simile of the snake, the raft simile. The Dhamma is like a raft used to cross a river, but you don't carry it with you afterward. So this emphasizes that even the teachings are ultimately to let go of. To let go. Don't get overly attached to the teachings. So it encourages yogis to go beyond intellectual understanding, develop direct insight into the nature of reality through personal experience. Now I should really have mentioned this here, with a teacher, right? Not by yourself, not just your own personal meditation experience. Okay, so we covered 3 Majjhima Nikāya suttas. We covered the Satipatthana Sutta, the Madhyamaka Sutta, and the simile of the snake. Any questions on these Majjhima Nikāya suttas? Okay. Now we move into the Samyutta Nikāya. The Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, setting in motion the wheel of the Dhamma, the first discourse after awakening, delivered to the 5 ascetics, Isipatthana. It represents the beginning of the Buddhist teaching career, the initial turning of the wheel of the Dhamma. It introduces the middle way, outline, avoiding the extremes of self-indulgence and self-mortification. Presents for the very first time ever heard the core framework of the Buddhist teaching, dukkha and its origin, cessation, nibbana, the path leading to this cessation, noble eightfold path, becoming the foundation for all Buddhist doctrine and practice. And upon hearing it, Pandana attained the Dhamma, So this was the first breakthrough to stream entry, marking the birth of the noble Sangha. My second favorite of the Samkhya Nikāya is the Anattha Sutta, the characteristic of non-self. This is where the Buddha, the second sutta, is where he starts to talk about vipassana. The first one, he's talking about the Four Noble Truths, the middle path, and the middle way and the Four Noble Truths. Here, he's starting to talk about the doctrine of anatta, showing the five aggregates: form, feeling, perception, formation, and consciousness are not self, because they are impermanent, subject to suffering. He guides the five ascetics to investigate the aggregates, leading them to insight and arhatship. So now, the first Sangha, the fully aware, awakened disciples, is formed. So this is the basis of insight meditation, encouraging clear observation of experience, the identity view, Sakkaya Ditthi, and the illusion of a permanent self. It invites direct examination, not blind belief, aligning with the Buddha's emphasis on experiential wisdom, panya, over speculative views. Next one, actually, I'm cheating a little bit here. Not just one sutta, it's the whole Nidana, the whole chapter. The Nidana Samyutta, the whole collection of verses around Nidana, dependent origination. This whole Samyutta unpacks the Samapada, the key to understanding samsara, rebirth, and cessation. 12.1, the first sutta in this Nidana, gives the formula and your core explanation, your basic definition, central to both Abhidhamma theory and vipassana realization. But the one I'm going to spend some time on here is 12.23. The Buddha explains how seeing deeply into dependent origination leads to awakening. The causal change here indicates an additional set of factors not present in the standard set of dependent origination. Let me explain. Ignorance, formations, consciousness, negative forms, based contact, feeling, craving, clinging, becoming, birth. That's you've seen that many times. There's a couple of changes though here. First of all, I've inserted a line here for present moment, because as we talked about in the Anattha Sutta, the sense-based contact and feeling, those represent an event that happens one at a time. Craving, clinging, becoming, birth, those are all processes that happen after the event. So this is the present moment. This is where we can break it. The first part of the feeling is the same for an arhat and for me. However, the difference, the subjective part, this is all the objective part above the present moment. The subjective part, the craving, clinging, becoming, and birth, that is all the based on my own personal inclinations, my own, it's subjective. So that's one thing. It's this line here. Now, this prerequisite sutta does not end. It makes one change. Normally, after craving, clinging, becoming, and birth, the last element that it talks about, sometimes in some suttas, they talk about old age and death. Sometimes they talk about old age, sickness, and death. Why do they talk about old age, sickness, and death? Because it links back to the three intoxications. Old age, there is the intoxication of youth. Youth don't think about old age, but when they get old, then they start thinking about their spiritual stuff. The intoxication of health. So, old age, sickness, this addresses the intoxication of health. When you're healthy, who cares? When your health starts to break down, then you start to care. Death, the intoxication of life. When you're not thinking about death, who cares? I'm going to live forever. When you start having people around you pass away, then you start caring. Now, why sometimes health is left out? It's because this path of dependent origination applies to all realms of existence. Devas don't have sickness. They don't get sick. They get old, they die, right? So if the sequence is universal, if the Buddha is preaching it in a universal way, he only mentions old age and death. If he's talking about human, he talks about old age, sickness, and death, because humans have that sickness. But in this sutta, they substitute that last factor, old age, sickness, and death, with suffering. This is worldly suffering mentioned here. Then what makes this sutta particularly interesting is it said, hey, contemplating on that suffering leads to a whole bunch of other factors, which culminate in nibbana. So, recognizing suffering because of old age, I'm getting rid of the intoxication of youth, the intoxication of health, the intoxication of life, and recognizing that existence is suffering. Here we're talking about existential suffering here. Not your, oh, I'm not feeling very well today. Not that kind of suffering. It's a existence is suffering. That leads to faith, joy, enthusiasm, tranquility, pleasant feeling, and concentration. This is setting up the mind for the present moment of knowledge and vision of things as they are, disenchantment, dispassion, emancipation of nibbana, knowledge and destruction of the cankers. Now, let me explain this a little bit more. The worldly sequence is suffering here refers to the existential suffering motivating one to seek escape. Because of suffering, recognizing that there is suffering, there's a motivation. I gotta get out of that. Somehow, we gotta get away from this. Right? Faith arises in response to seeing suffering and hearing the Dhamma. Hey, the Buddha talked about this exactly. This is what the Buddha was talking about. Wow. Now, I haven't experienced enlightenment or any of these insights yet, but I'm simply having faith that, hey, somebody is pointing the path. Joy, enthusiasm, tranquility, pleasant feeling, and concentration. Purified and inclined toward the Dhamma. This is through meditation. As one meditates, joy, enthusiasm, tranquility, and pleasant feeling and concentration get stronger and stronger and stronger until all of these become supporting conditions for knowledge and vision of things as they are during Vipassana meditation. Now I'm going to go through these. This is the worldly sequence. Now I'm going to change my perspective to that of a meditator. Dukkha. All insights begin with an understanding of dukkha. This is a direct observation of dukkha, etc. is the context for all insights. It needs to have that perspective of existence is suffering as a starting point. Faith. These are the early insights. The square brackets represent insight knowledges. The first insight knowledge, the discrimination of mind and matter, and the conditioning, these are the first two insight knowledges. They are part of faith. When one starts to experience for oneself this idea of nama and rupa, it's not just from the Buddhist teaching, it's from my own direct experience. This builds faith. The confidence arises that hearing the Dhamma and verifying it initial insight. This prepares the mind for clear observation. You got to go through that, breaking into Rupa and seeing that one conditions the other. Everything arises based on conditions. You got to directly experience it before you can go deeper for clear observation. Joy, this follows the knowledge of comprehension, samasana jnana, the third insight knowledge. So joy arises when one gains faith this and sees the coherence of the three characteristics of all formations. So at the samasana jnana stage, the third insight knowledge, there's the direct experience of anicca, dukkha, anatta. It's no longer just theory, it is direct. Big impact. And joy, wow. Oh, it's very powerful. Supports and follows enthusiasm, piti. Now, I'm not saying that enthusiasm or piti cannot exist before this stage, before the third insight knowledge. Okay, the third insight knowledge, or the fourth insight knowledge, but it becomes a powerful component. We're talking no more a worldly, we're talking a deep enthusiasm, because the mind becomes so uplifted and now engaged and energized, just don't want to stop meditating. It's just so wonderful with the third and the fourth insight knowledge. When that starts to calm down and all that excitement calms down, then the fourth insight knowledge of Abhidhamma and knowledge of dissolution, Mahayana, as rapture fades, tranquility stabilizes the mind for deeper seeing into impermanence. The mind becomes not quite so excited at all these new experiences, but relaxing back into the moment, just settling back and experiencing again and again and again the arising, the anicca, the dukkha, and anatta. More anicca at this stage, because it's the arising and falling away here, and then in Bhagavajnana, the constant falling away. Pleasant feeling, that supports the same two, the Abhidhamma, where you're arising and falling away, and the Bhagavajnana. So a subtle and refined pleasure, free from gross excitement, aids in concentration and seeing phenomena clearly. Concentration, deep. Now we're not talking about the kind of concentration that you have when you're studying something or even in the early insights. We're talking the very, very strong concentration that you need to deal with dissolution, fear, danger, all those dukkha jnanas, all those unpleasant aspects of reality. When facing them face to face, if you are heavily concentrated, there's just observation. If you're not heavily concentrated, they suck you in and drag you down. All these painful, just visceral experiences of suffering. So but having all that strong concentration is necessary for all higher insights. Going quickly, I'm going to go, because now we're starting to get to the higher insight knowledges. I'm going to go a little bit more quickly. Knowledge and vision of things as they are. This is the Mahayana, where things are just a little dissolving, constantly falling away, all the way through to knowledge of equanimity toward beings, where, yeah, everything's falling away, but I'm okay with that. Yes, I'm watching dukkha, but I'm okay with that. I'm upekkha, neutral towards all that falling away. So the clear perception of impermanence, satisfactoriness, and non-self, it culminates in equanimous, calmness, observation. Disenchantment, the Veda, this is the knowledge of disenchantment, insight knowledge, insight into becomes mature, just grows tired. I'm tired of all this suffering. Dispassion, viraga, This is the knowledge desire for deliverance. It's just I'm not just tired of this, but I want out. And knowledge of re-observations, going back and checking everything again, re-experiencing a lot more detail during the 10 insight knowledge, the anicca dukkha anatta. So the mind inclines toward letting go, dispassion, and cessation. Emancipation, we're now at Magga. This is experiencing Nibbana, realization of Nibbana. Knowledge of destruction cankers, that is the 15th insight knowledge of reviewing fruition knowledge, the fruit, and the knowledge of reviewing. So this is after insight, there's a reviewing process. A fruit and then a reviewing process that happens automatically is the 15th and 16th insight knowledge. This is before becoming an arhat. Do one more sutta because it ties back. In the Abhidhamma Nikāya, here the list of numbered. What purpose? The Buddha is asked, for what purpose is Dhamma learned and practiced? Why do we do this? The Buddha replies that it's not for knowledge, eloquence, not so you can debate, but for freedom of mind. Presents a progressive, casual sequence leading from virtuous behavior to liberation, starting with non-regret, the purpose and benefit of virtuous behavior. Now, here is the sequence I showed you before. Here's the new sequence. So, what is the purpose and benefit of virtuous behavior? Why do we do that? Well, it's non-regret. If you really do that properly, it's non-regret. What is the purpose and benefit of non-regret? The Buddha talks about joy, excitement, tranquility. It doesn't feel like concentration. All the English doesn't exist. The opposite. Yeah, he collapsed for a couple of years, and it's 10. This is the book of tens. But the point is that you don't have to just be focusing on suffering. Here, focusing on virtuous behavior also can lead to that same sequence. There's a story, I remember hearing Joseph Goldstein tell a story of he was practicing Sayadaw Pandita, and for a long time he was not making any progress. He approached Sayadaw Pandita and said, I've been going at this for weeks and weeks and weeks, no progress. Sayadaw Pandita said, review your seal. Joseph Goldstein went, what have I done wrong? The master told me to review my seal. I must be doing something wrong. So he started getting all frustrated, upset. What have I done wrong? Self-searching. So he went back to Sayadaw Pandita. Sayadaw Pandita said, no. Look at how good you've been. Look at how good your seal is, and that should be your inspiration for regret. You have nothing to be regretful for. So it doesn't have to be negative. Suffering is associated with negative that sends off this chain reaction. You can look at your own seal as a trigger to going towards enlightenment. Okay, so any questions on these last couple of suttas? Yeah.
Normally, we put all like this to right. We connect both on class. But maybe this so maybe today study the sutta with the thing is too many. Or you're doing parallel time. You could be speaking something else. Or
how do you? There are 10,000 suttas. How do you know where to start? I'm giving you here 3 papers in each of the nikāyas. That is one place to start. Another place to start is this. Okay, I gave you 3 suttas from the Nikāya. right? The Brahmajala, right? And then the Mahaparinibbana, the Silava, Sigala Sutta, Silava, Sigala, right? Then I gave you 3 from the Majjhima Nikāya. Then I'm going to give you 3 from the Samyutta Nikāya. I'm about to give the 3 from the Abhidhamma Nikāya. I just started with the first one. That gives you a start. However, another place might be this. Access to Insight website has got an excellent index of suttas according to topic. So if you're having a problem with a particular, you understand a particular topic better, use that as a guide to which suttas to look at. And then once you've identified some suttas, switch to the wisdom publications. That's what I do. Yes, they're there. Bhikkhu has translated them. They're okay for a first start. But if I really want to understand, then I go to the wisdom publication version, the same sutta. So how do you start, rather other than sutta study class? You've got my top 3. Second way is through the index of topics, because there's going to be a bunch of topics there. Many, it goes on for pages. So that will help you zero in on some suttas and then read the access to Insight version, which will give you a general idea of the sutta, but then to dive deeply, go into the wisdom publication version. That's my approach. Good.
Just for verification, you have got a particular Sama there. Which is the breaking point? Which is the break-off point from that cycle?
Okay. The breaking point of penitent origination is for the present moment. Feeling happens naturally. You cannot stop feeling. Pleasant feeling is going to arise in an arhat and that is an automatic happening. However, what happens in response to that feeling depends on your conditioning. That's where the mind can be trained. So it's awareness of feeling. But the problem, quite frankly, is feeling so quickly slips into a reaction to it. Pleasant feeling, it's always, oh, that's nice. So develop the concentration and try to go one step back before feeling to contact. Be aware of the senses are experiencing something. Don't even talk about pleasant, unpleasant, just the senses are experiencing something before it starts to be reacted with as, identified as pleasant or unpleasant. Because in the Great Questions and Answers Sutta, it talks about how slippery the slope is from feeling into perception and experiences, all the personal type stuff. So with concentration, go back to the content.
Which means that once you are in the feeling, the truth is that
It's a slippery slope. Yeah. Once you're in feeling, it's very quickly going to slip into liking, disliking, or ignoring. Once you're in liking, disliking, or ignoring, you're already in the tied to the craving and clinging and becoming so forth. Try to avoid getting caught up in the feeling by going back one step. However, I'm going to tell you it requires some concentration. You're not going to be able to do it in daily life. What you need to do is do some meditation, be aware. I'll give you a simple example. Meditating in a very, very quiet room, there's a sound outside.
Yeah.
There's awareness of, okay, there was a sound, and the mind has got sensual desire, meaning it wants to connect with that sense object. You can actually experience the mind running to that ear. Okay? Or you're doing walking meditation, your concentration is really good. All of a sudden, there's a bit of a pain that wasn't there before. The mind runs to that location. So, be aware of the contact. Go back to where the mind is first making contact with that new sense object, be it a new pain sensation or a new sound. Okay? And be aware of it. And the more that you're aware of it, and your meditation is good, and you're aware of this experience, then you can start to extrapolate it and say, this is happening all the time. You're going to be a little bit more sensitive to it during daily life. But without that direct personal experience with deep concentration of experiencing contact directly, contact is not a physical contact. This is more of a mind opening up to whatever it is out there. Don't think it's a passive. Contact is passive. It's not active. Contact is the mind opening up to the sensation that's coming in through the sense bases. Okay? Through the six sense bases. So the mind opening up to that sound coming in. It's not the mind running out and hitting that sound. No. Contact is the mind opening up to that sound. That's what contact is. It's passive. Same too when there is the experiencing when doing walking meditation, bit of pain, new sensation, the mind goes, oh, that's different, and it runs to go check it out. Okay? And when there is that experience of the sound outside the meditation hall, you can watch. It's so interesting to watch. Oh, the mind is grabbing that piece of information and processing it, grabbing some more information and processing it. And you can see the mind building up a whole story. Oh, that's a person speaking. Who is it that's speaking? Why are they speaking and disturbing me? What are they talking about? All this gets built up bit by bit by bit, brick by brick by brick, with every little contact, new sound coming in, new vibration coming in. And it's experiencing how the mind is connecting all of these, contacting with all these different little bits and vibrations and building up this full long story. Or a little bit of pain in the leg. Am I gray? Is this a cramp? Is this going to stop me from walking? All the story builds up. Watching the story build up in the mind, you see how the mind works. Abhidhamma calls this walking the dog. Okay, why he calls it walking the dog is, imagine that you're out walking the dog. The dog gets interested in something, runs over there, then comes back to the path. Runs here, comes back to the path. Runs there, comes back to the path. It's always getting distracted by whatever's around it. And you can experience this firsthand, how the mind is just running here and there, running here and there, running here and there. And then when the concentration becomes even deeper, instead of being at the mind door and seeing the stuff being run to it, you actually rest onto the consciousness and the objects are coming to you. It's what Abhidhamma calls the moth and the flame, where consciousness is the flame and all these objects are coming into it. Doesn't matter what the objects are, they're just coming in. Big objects coming in, small objects coming in. Ding. So there is, when you start resting on the consciousness, getting those kinds of experiences during meditation gives a different perspective to how things work in real life. So this is at the contact stage. Okay. So,
how it be to
oh, absolutely. Oh, you can read books of theory, but one experience, direct experience that hits you in your gut is going to have much bigger effect than a book of theory. Because what's going to happen is when those experiences happen, you're going to misinterpret it. Just like I talked about the Ramajala Sutta, how all those people misinterpreted experiencing past lives and came up with all these theories. Absolutely. No, I mean, all people. Yes, because my conditioning and your conditioning are different.
But ultimately,
The whole. I mean,
people experiences to some below
when I say they're conditioned, each of us have our own different experiences and conditions. I'm not talking just this existence. I'm talking previous existences too. All that adds up. Everything. So yes, it's going to be different. And for some people, it may appear easy this life, but maybe because they really worked through it a lot in the previous life. So yeah.
Thing is, meditating is something that happens really that is real. So if no when I'm and I look at this, feels the horizons. Like I need to you know, feel like skating. I will the next thing you know that feel the bars and next thing I stop you're thinking that you are thinking living in some sort of thing. So have you really song? It's like really where
No. It's just so quick. It's so subtle that doesn't matter how often it happens.
so real.
No. It's still superficial. If your experience is still superficial, it doesn't matter if it happens a million times, it's still superficial. What you need is the deep with concentration and mindfulness and wisdom to really experience it and know what's going on.
So next thing after
It's so slippery, it's happened before you even recognize it. Intense meditation will give you the direct experience. I can talk to you about walking the dog as a story, but it's so different from when you actually experience it. Superficial direct experience. I talk about at the elemental level like this. Touch and go experience as a without concentration, without deep concentration, you're looking at it very far distance. You can't really see what's going on from distance. You can watch it many times, only when you're really close to it can you see actually what's going on. That's when, like the walk the dog happens. I mean, you can observe consciousness going from the mind door to the body door to the ear door to the eye door, running around, collecting bits of information, and the mind door building up the whole little story, building all that. It can be observed. Then it becomes a direct personal experience rather than theory of items on a whiteboard. So
the Singhala
Siglavada Sutta. Sigla, yeah.
stop you you know in the one generation value raising marriage and also
Yep.
to support parents.
Yep.
We actually for don't educate state agent that is done.
I mean,
Yeah. They have
okay. If you look at Brother Tio's book, this is the next big sutta that we're gonna get into. We're gonna dive into all that. So I prefer to discuss it there, but I agree with you. There are some, remember this was given 2,500 years ago in India, right? The sutta, when things like arranged marriage was part of the culture.
Even what the role of time they agree. They're all voting minds.
Well, a lot of them, fidelity, respect, honor, share authority, provide gifts, yes. Organizing things, hospitality. When when I offered it was my wife that did most of the work. Fidelity, wise budgeting, of course. Skillfulness at whatever trade he's got. Cooking and so on. So, yes, it has changed a little bit, but it's not, it's still got an element of truth to it. Yes, the principles,
Yeah, the principle behind it.
Yeah.
Is the
the principles,
you take care of one, not your fucking take care of you. You don't need to. We can with the idea
Yeah.
about
it's
the principle is
the
that.
principles. All right. Any other questions? Oh, somebody's in the chat. There's a question in the chat. No, I think. Okay, so if there's no other questions, we will, somebody could read the
This one becomes difficult in the soul focus to study down. The good things are done and vice versa. We learn and that's part of the blood issue. Whenever there is any doubt or wrong understanding, it still guides and straighten it. With a proper understanding the doubt, we can now put to practice. The right understanding is right cause, and in turn, give rise to the right action, right speech, right behavior. The right brain, you can face the reality. And there is begin to speak to them, discussing with them, study behaviors, help us hold people, figure this being face. May all beings and everything space and with Eva and others and others. Rejoice in this mercy they have acquired and may they not protect us. May this mercy contribute also the realization of the life. Without to not some actually this particular and